the most powerful woman in Europe, didn't die quietly. She fell, suddenly, violently, in the heart of the Winter Palace, and within hours the greatest scandal in royal history was born. On a cold November morning in 1796, the palace that had witnessed coups, coronations, and executions now watched something far more unsettling: the final breaths of Catherine the Great and the beginning of a lie that would outlive her. Before we dive further, drop a quick comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Catherine II lies unconscious on her massive imperial bed, the velvet canopy looming above her like a dark red sky. Only hours earlier, she had collapsed in a small private bathroom, her body folding to the marble floor without a cry. Servants lifted her in a panic, rushing her through gilded corridors lit by trembling candle flames. Now, she is barely breathing. Court physicians gather around her in stiff silence, their faces drawn and helpless. They know there is nothing left to save. Catherine's life. 34 years of conquest, reform, war, diplomacy, ambition, and constant motion is fading out in slow, uneven breaths. By dawn, she will be gone. And almost immediately, something begins to move through the palace, through the city, through Russia itself. A story, a whisper, a seed of poison. It doesn't speak of her campaigns against the Ottomans. It doesn't recall the cultural renaissance she sparked. It doesn't mention the museums she built, or the philosophers she corresponded with, or the empire she reshaped. The world chooses not to remember any of that. It chooses something else, something grotesque. By the time Catherine's body cools, servants are already murmuring that her death wasn't natural, that something happened. Something shameful, something unspeakable. And in the chaos that always follows the death of a ruler lies travel faster than truth. The rumor claims the Empress didn't die from a stroke. It claims she died beneath a horse. As the story spreads, details mutate like a disease. In one version, she engineered a pulley system to suspend a stallion above her. In another, she grew bored of men and sought something else. In every retelling, the ending is the same. The harness snaps, and Catherine is crushed under the weight of her own depravity. It's absurd. It's impossible. And that's exactly why it thrives. A scandal that vile, that theatrical, that humiliating, it's irresistible. It slips from parlours to marketplaces, from the salons of Paris to the courts of Vienna, until the lie becomes more vivid in people's minds than the truth ever could be. But if you peel back the cruelty of the myth, something important remains. The life of a woman who terrified her opponents long before they found a way to defile her memory. Catherine was not born to shake continents. She wasn't even born with a claim to anything greater than a minor German title. She entered the world as Sophia Augusta Frederica of Anhalt-Zerbst, a girl expected to live a quiet, unremarkable life. But Europe's politics have a habit of pulling the obscure into the heart of storms. At 14, she was singled out by the Russian court as a potential bride for the heir to the throne. That heir was Peter, the future. Peter III, a boy who would one day prove disastrously unfit to rule. But in 1744, none of that was known. All anyone saw was an opportunity for a strategic marriage. Sophia's father delivered a single piece of advice before she left. Russia will not adapt to you. You must adapt to Russia. And she did. The young girl travelled across frozen Europe, arriving in St. Petersburg with the determination of someone who understood this was her one chance to escape insignificance. She converted to the Orthodox faith, took the name Catherine, and married Peter in a grand ceremony meant to symbolize stability and unity. But behind the spectacle, the marriage was a slow-moving disaster. Peter was erratic, vindictive, emotionally stunted. He openly insulted Catherine before the court. He spent more time playing with Prussian toy soldiers than attempting to lead an empire. He paraded mistresses before her, and their marriage, for years, remained unconsummated, a humiliation that Catherine endured in tense silence. Every humiliation forced her further inward. Every insult sharpened her understanding of power. Every cold night beside a man who despised her pushed her closer toward the truth she eventually embraced. Survival required transformation, so Catherine transformed. She mastered Russian until she spoke it more eloquently than many nobles. She consumed books by the hundreds, histories, political treatises, philosophical works, anything that could teach her how to navigate a hostile court. She built alliances, not loudly, but quietly, methodically, forming bonds that Peter was too arrogant to notice. In secret, she created a foundation of influence, strong enough to hold up a throne, and then came the moment that tipped everything. Empress Elizabeth died in 1761, and Peter ascended the throne. What followed was a catastrophe nearly unmatched in Russian history. Peter alienated the Orthodox Church with abrupt Lutheran impositions. He infuriated the army by praising Prussia, the very nation Russia had defeated after years of bloodshed. He pushed reforms that offended every layer of the nobility. And worst of all, he made it clear he intended to rid himself of Catherine by divorce, by exile, possibly by imprisonment. He had no idea how dangerous she had become. For 17 years, Catherine had been preparing for a moment like this. 17 years of watching, learning, enduring, calculating. And in 1760, when Peter marched blindly toward his own destruction, she acted, backed by the Imperial Guard and the Orlov brothers, one of whom was her lover. Peter was forced to abdicate. Within days, he was dead. Catherine took the throne at 33. A woman with no Russian blood had just seized the largest empire in Europe. And that moment, that act, is the shadow under which every rumour, every whisper, every obscene lie would eventually grow. Because some people never forgive a woman for surviving, and they never forgive her for winning. Catherine came to power the way storms arrive, suddenly, violently, with a force nobody could ignore. Once she took the throne, there was no hesitation, no gentle transition, no pause for breath. She ruled immediately, decisively, as if she had been preparing her entire life for this single moment. Because she had. The Russia she inherited was enormous, but unstable. A vast, icy beast, stitched together from conquered lands, fragile loyalties, and centuries of fear. To rule it required more than authority. It required imagination. It required will. It required a kind of relentless ambition that few men possessed, and almost no woman was ever allowed to display. Catherine had all of it. She began by reshaping the court itself. Gone were the stifling rituals and the intellectual stagnation of previous reigns. In their place came scholars, architects, philosophers, and scientists from across Europe. Petersburg, a city of cold stone and colder politics, started to glow with something new, ideas. Catherine devoured these ideas. Voltaire, Diderot, Montesquieu, their works filled her libraries and her private thoughts. She didn't just read them, she challenged them, wrote to them, debated their theories from thousands of miles away. For nearly 15 years, she corresponded with Voltaire, and in a strange way, he became her public ally. In Paris, he called her the Northern Star and defended her image as an enlightened monarch. But while Europe discussed her intellect, Catherine focused on something more dangerous: expansion. Russia's borders had always been the source of its insecurity. Too long to defend, too thinly held, too vulnerable to enemies on all sides. Catherine intended to change that forever. Her armies moved like winter wind across the Black Sea frontier. She launched 2 major wars against the Ottoman Empire, shattering Turkish power in the region and securing Russia a permanent foothold on the Black Sea. Crimea fell under her control in 1783, transforming Russia into a naval force that Europe could no longer ignore. In the West, she carved Poland apart piece by piece, participating in 3 partitions that erased the country from the map. With each political maneuver, each treaty signed under pressure of Russian guns, her empire swelled. The map of Europe was no longer shifting around her. She was the one shaping it. And yet Catherine's ambition reached even further. She dreamed of resurrecting the fallen Byzantine Empire, placing her grandson Constantine on a newly reborn Greek throne. The plan, known as the Greek Project, was bold enough to seem mad, but Catherine did not think in small terms. She saw empires like chessboards, and she intended Russia to become the most powerful piece in the game. The project never materialized, but the attempt itself revealed who she truly was, a ruler who refused to accept limits, even the limits of history. Inside her empire, she pursued a different kind of conquest: culture. She gathered art with the hunger of a collector who knew she was building something eternal. Masterpieces from Italy, France, Holland, and beyond were shipped to St. Petersburg in endless crates. The collection grew so massive that she built a new wing of the palace simply to house it. That wing became the Hermitage, a monument to a woman who wanted to turn Russia into something refined, sophisticated, impossible to overlook. But while Catherine built museums and wrote to philosophers, the empire beneath her glittering capital was cracking. Millions of serfs lived in brutal conditions. Families were sold like cattle. Peasants were beaten, starved, and worked to exhaustion under noble landlords who held near total power over them. In 1773, the fragile order shattered. Yemelyan Pugachev, a Cossack with charisma and a dangerous talent for storytelling, gathered thousands by claiming to be Peter III, Catherine's murdered husband, returned from the dead to liberate the oppressed. His rebellion wasn't a skirmish, it was a wildfire. Town after town fell, landlords were slaughtered. Imperial authority collapsed across entire regions. For the first time in her reign, Catherine felt the empire trembling beneath her. She responded the only way she believed would preserve Russia and herself. Her armies marched with ruthless precision. Pugachev was captured, dragged to Moscow in a cage, and executed in a public spectacle designed to freeze rebellion in the blood of the witnesses. His followers were hanged along the roads, their bodies left swaying in the wind. The message was unmistakable: break Russia, and Russia will break you back. The rebellion changed her. Whatever idealistic ideas she once held about improving the lives of serfs evaporated. Stability demanded obedience, and obedience demanded fear. Catherine expanded the nobility's control over their peasants, tightening the chains in an empire already notorious for its brutality. This duality, enlightenment on the surface, iron beneath, became the signature of her rule, but the world rarely judged her for political contradictions. It judged her for something else entirely: her personal life. Catherine's lovers were not secrets, they were part of her court's rhythm. Some were political allies, some were emotional havens, some were young men eager to be chosen. She rewarded them with titles, lands, and estates, and when the affair ended, she ensured they landed softly, often married to wealthy wives or promoted to comfortable ranks. Europe's kings had done worse for centuries. But Catherine was a woman, and women were not allowed to behave like that. Her enemies seized on every relationship. They whispered that she was reckless, depraved, insatiable. They painted her as an empress, ruled by lust rather than strategy, ignoring the fact that many of the men she chose also helped her govern. They ignored the nuance and printed the caricature. It was easier to believe a woman could control an empire with her body rather than her mind. The contempt gathered like storm clouds, rumours mutating in the dark until something far more vicious was ready to be born. A rumour powerful enough to outlive her, a rumour crafted to tear her legacy apart piece by piece. But what it would become, and how far it would spread, no one in Catherine's lifetime could have imagined. A lie was coming, one so obscene it would crush truth beneath it. Catherine the Great's death should have settled her story. It should have ended with a state funeral, a sealed coffin, and a legacy written in the vast territory she expanded and the brutal rebellion she crushed. But instead, the moment she died, something venomous began crawling out from the cracks of Europe's politics. What started as a whisper grew into the most infamous lie in royal history. Her final hours were painfully ordinary. On November 16, 1796, Catherine collapsed in her private bathroom, her body failing without fanfare. Servants carried her to her bed, where she drifted between breaths until she slipped away the next morning.